allow working people to access the ballot box without impediment, without penalty. Access is crucial to increasing participation in our democracy and giving people the opportunity to express their point of view. This issue of when you vote has been contentious for about 150 years because this voting on Tuesday has always been seen as an impediment to working people voting. Everybody understood that. It requires, in many cases, a loss of wages, essentially a tax.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up out of your chairs. And go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take
you. So much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. I got to tell you, the more we learn about Roy Moore, the more I dislike Roy Moore. And look, I disliked him a lot to begin with. But the more we find out, the more that flows, the more the floodgates open, the more you go, what an absolute cretin. I mean, hypocrite much? Yes. And look, we knew this. And again, it goes back to my premise on the hyper-religious and those who do the proselytizing and point their fingers at everyone else. Lots and lots of skeletons in the closet. And the thing that infuriates me, and today I just been stuck on this, that evidently the open secret in Alabama is that, well, Roy Moore's a dirtbag. And everybody knew it. According to a New Yorker article, evidently this reporter went down there and spoke to a whole bunch of people in Moore's hometown of Gadsden. And, either talked or messaged with like a dozen people there. And again, they all knew. In fact, the hush secret was that Moore had been banned from a local mall because he was mauling teenagers. And you go, what? And nobody knew about this. This didn't come out at any point during the whole culture warrior thing. This didn't come out at any point during the let's raise money to save Roy Moore from being thrown off the Supreme Court. This didn't come out during the whole 10 Commandments monument nonsense. None of that until now. Finally, someone had the courage to step forward. In fact, this reporter said that evidently, five people of the local legal community there in the small town of Gadsden, they knew. 2 cops who worked in the town, they knew. A bunch of people who just hung out in the mall, they knew. Everybody knew. And it reminded me, again, of, I bring things back to my personal experience. When I was a kid, my mother always warned me that there were guys like this. And some of these guys like this, they like little boys. So my mother said, you got to stay away from these guys and these people, and just be safe. And she always used an example of a guy that worked at a high school that she went to, and said, he's this kind of. And I knew about him from the time I was a small kid. So after my mother passed away, I moved in with my grandparents, and I ended up going to the same high school. And there he was. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who my mother was. She didn't say it was this guy. She said there was a guy. And immediately I met this guy. And it was like, immediately the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Because I remember it vividly. I'm in 8th grade. The guy calls me down to his office in the boys' locker room. So the office is on one wall, the lockers are there, and the showers are over there, and he would stand and watch the boys shower all the time. And immediately I go in, because we're going to meet the new kid, and he puts his arm on my shoulder, and immediately from my shoulder down to the backside, and immediately my mother's voice popped into my head, run. And it was one of those things where, I didn't feel harassed. I felt angry, and I felt like I wanted to, beat him into oblivion. But the thing is everybody knew. And I told people that everybody knew. Everybody knew until finally I had graduated. And it was like 2 years after I graduated, one kid came forward and said, this is what happened to me. And the floodgates opened. And there were like 200 people who came forward. Like 200 people from over like a 50-year span. From multiple states that this guy had been doing this stuff and getting away with it because nobody said anything. The rumors were all there. Everybody knew. Everybody knew. And yet nobody did anything. And I look at this scenario. Again, another one of those moments where you go, everybody knew. And yet they still put this giant steaming piece of excrement up on a pedestal. And the religious folk, they just love him because he's preaching the good word. And you go, hold the phone for just a minute. Explain to me how this is okay. And, the one thing that you're seeing right now is finally people are saying, enough of this nonsense. Enough of this self-shaming. Enough of this, it was my fault. Enough. And holding people like this. This guy should have never been elected to, be a dog catcher. He shouldn't have been allowed around the dogs. And yet he held numerous high-profile positions. While again, as I point out, everybody knew, just like the guy from my high school. Everybody knew. His name was plastered all over everything in the town. On the natatorium, on the ice rink, on the football field. His name was put on everything. And yet, the open secret, everybody knew and did absolutely nothing about it. Because maybe the thought is if, who knows? Maybe the thought is if we don't talk about it, if, we don't acknowledge that it actually happened, maybe it didn't actually happen. And you go, how completely freaking stupid is that? So, immediately when these allegations came out, I had a couple of people email me going, well, how do you know it's true? These are just, I'm going, I fully buy it. I fully believe it. Nobody's going to take on, in Alabama, the Christian warrior if these allegations aren't true. And I said, look, at the time, there are going to be more. And I think we're up to, 6 now? And I assume there are going to be more. In fact, the latest one that I guess just came out today said that she really thought he was going to rape her because he was really forceful. And again, you look at this guy who has a God complex to begin with, that he is somebody. Because understand, this is about power more than it's about, just I believe it's about power more than it's about actual sexual activity. I think it's about control. I think it's about one person having a power over another person. This is what we're seeing in Hollywood. And again, hello, surprise. It's been going on in Hollywood forever. And again, open secret. Everybody knows. So we act somehow surprised now that people are coming forward and going, yeah, this is what happened. This is what happened. Surprise. Not me. Hello, open secret for years. And oddly enough, not just with women. Evidently, a lot of guys are being forcibly abused. Who knew Kevin Spacey was, Kevin Spacey? So the hope is that, again, when these rumors and these open secrets are there front and center, that maybe just a thought, that maybe we don't allow them to get out of hand. That maybe, we don't allow an abuser, a predator, like the guy that was the guy at my school. 50 years he got away with it. 50 years. And oddly enough, and this is one of those really just bizarre how screwed up our society is, served 18 months in jail because only 2 of the counts were within the statute of limitations, and got out after 18 months and ended up, you can't even make this up, ended up as the activities director at a juvenile detention center for boys. Cannot make that up. Didn't last long. He was only there a couple of months until they eventually caught up to it. But, still, a couple of months. It's amazing stuff. But I'd be interested in your thoughts. Should the people of Alabama know, or is this one of those things? Well, it's just he just liked young girls. Or as I tweeted out the other day, maybe his new theme song will be My Sharona. Look it up if you need to get the reference. So curious. Rick at the RickSmithShow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, evidently our president has chosen a new person to lead Health and Human Services. Tom Price out, over $1 million in travel costs that we picked up. The new guy, evidently, is a former big pharma executive. He's going to be in charge of figuring out how to lower drug prices. Do you think it's possible? Former big pharma guy going to even consider lowering drug prices? We shall find out. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Rich Fiesta from the Alliance for Retired Americans is going to be here to talk about that. Right back after this. Stick around. This is another Rick Smith Show.
There's a flaw in the system, and the fly in the ointment is going to bring the whole thing down. Floodgates, the demon's loose, the big gun is spoken, and we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is... On this day in labor history, the year was 1927. That was the day that the Holland Tunnel, connecting New York City and New Jersey, opened for traffic. Before the tunnel, the only way to cross the Hudson River from the city to New Jersey was by ferry. City officials decided to build a tunnel to alleviate congestion. But they had a problem. All those cars driving underground would cause a potentially deadly buildup of carbon monoxide. There had to be a way to ventilate the tunnel. Engineer Clifford Holland came up with the solution. Big fans located at each end of the tunnel could draw fresh air into the passage. The giant fans were nearly as tall as a 10-story building. In honor of his engineering work, the tunnel was named after Holland. But he did not live to see the completion of his vision. The tunnel also owes its existence to unionized labor. The workers who performed the back-breaking work of digging New York's vehicle and subway tunnels called themselves the Sandhogs. In a 1983 book about the union, written by Paul Delaney, a worker recounted his memories of the Holland Project, saying, quote, "The turnover in workers was unbelievable. Men would work an hour or maybe a shift, and they'd never be seen on the job again. Even the strongest men were tired after 15 or 20 minutes in the air. And there was always the worry about being fired. If a man went for more than 2 sips of water during a shift, he was told to collect his wages and go home." 14 workers died on the project. More than 1 billion cars have made the trip under the Hudson River since it first opened. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. So Donald Trump announced a new HHS secretary, out with Tom Price and his luxurious travel habits, and in with, well, somebody who, curiously enough, is a former big pharma executive. And you got to ask the question, is this what's best for we the people? A former big pharma executive who has a history of, well, fleecing us? Is he the guy you want into those positions? Well, I don't know. We're going to find out, which is why I've asked Rich Fiesta to come talk with us. He's executive director of the Alliance for Retired Americans. Rich, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick, for having me on, and it's always great to be back with you.
So I look at this appointment, and I guess, I don't know what his qualifications to be Health and Human Services Secretary would be, unless it's gouging people for prices on drugs.
Well, that's right. The fellow's name is Alex Azar. He's 50 years old. He had served in the George W. Bush administration in the council and deputy secretary of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, and previously had very, very strong conservative credentials, starting with being a law clerk to Justice Antonin Scalia, and a prominent member of the Federalist Society, which is the ultra-right conservative group of lawyers that try to place their own in key government positions and in the judiciaries around the country. So we know where he's coming from his pedigree, and as you mentioned, he worked for Eli Lilly, the drug company based in Indianapolis.
Now, as executive director of a group that looks after seniors and retired people, what could this mean for retirees? Because look, Medicare is under attack, Medicaid's under attack. I know Social Security will be on the table at some point soon. Drug prices are one thing that seniors are keenly aware of. How do you think he's going to be able to address, or will he address, the concerns of seniors?
Well, from what he's said publicly, we have to be very on guard about Mr. Azar. He has attacked the Affordable Care Act from the day it became law. He has worked for a company at Lilly that has been under intense and fair criticism because it's raised the price of insulin, which especially seniors need more than any other age group to fight diabetes. And this, is a drug that's been around for decades, so it's not one of these new fancy expensive drugs, but yet we've seen, 100% plus increases in insulin over the last few years, 2 to 3 years as well, Rick. So Americans pay the highest drug prices in the world, and that hasn't happened by accident. And this fellow was around in the Bush administration when the privatization of drug delivery under Medicare in 2003 became law. So he was at the HHS department then. So you have to be skeptical at the least going in.
Yeah, well, I'm skeptical of anyone that this president puts up for nomination, because he's got a very interesting track record, to say the least. But at least in looking at this guy's background, at least you go, okay, well, he has some qualifications, even if they're bad. There are at least some marginal qualifications, right?
Sure. He's been in the healthcare space, so to speak, but I wouldn't call him consumer-friendly or senior-friendly by any choice based on his record. I mean, he is a privatizer. He's advocated that Medicaid be turned into block grants and that the states can have the authority to determine who gets it and who doesn't without a lot of strings attached to it. Yeah. So he has a very long public track record.
And again, I look at things that you've just said. Not much different than Tom Price, right?
No, I think in some ways, I don't think the new nominee, Mr. Azar, will be chartering a lot of private jets around the country to the tune of 7+ figures at the American taxpayers' expense. But nonetheless, he knows the Department of HHS very well and can hit the ground running for his and this administration's agenda. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, so, and again, that's the scary stuff to me, because, I had a friend of mine the other day say, I can't wait till Betsy DeVos is out because there's, talk of her leaving the Department of Education. I'm going, I don't necessarily know that I want her to leave, because you might get somebody who is, hyper competent and hyper motivated and able to actually get things done. And this is, looking at this Alex Azar guy, that's the fear, is that he is competent, he is motivated, and he's going to take us really in a horribly wrong direction.
Right. I mean, this is a man who fit in very comfortably with Paul Ryan's worldview that Medicare should be privatized, that individuals on Medicare have to go up against the insurance companies to get their care, that they'd get a voucher, and the value of the voucher decreases over time, so more out-of-pocket money coming from our seniors for their basic health care needs. This has been the mantra of Paul Ryan since the Republicans took over the House in 2011. And the nominee, Mr. Azar's record is lockstep in with proposals like that.
Any chance of pushing back? I know the Democrats are going to put up something of a resistance, but any chance of this nomination going down, do you think?
I would say it's very small, Rick, because of the necessity only needing 50 votes to stop a filibuster and then 50 votes to confirm a nominee. So I think the folks who are concerned about the high cost of drug prices and the delivery and the availability of health care in the United States need to ask their representatives to ask tough questions during his confirmation hearing. And in Pennsylvania, for example, both senators are on the Finance Committee. So both Senator Casey and Senator Toomey have a chance to ask some tough questions. I wonder which one will.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. On the other side of this, I wanted to ask you about, this week is going to be a big week on the tax fight front. And look, I look at this horrible tax plan that the Republicans have put forth, more cuts, huge, drastic, deep, painful cuts to programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And you go, at some point, when do we stop with more for the billionaires and less for everyone else? And I know there were 400 millionaires and billionaires today that came out and said, don't cut our taxes. Where do you see things going this week?
Well, this week the House of Representatives is going to vote on the package, and because under the House rules the majority can control debate, the hours of debate, what amendments can be offered or not offered. So it's, I would say, an almost certainty that it will pass, but it's going to give a lot of Republicans in states like Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, for example, that have property taxes that are higher than, let's say, Texas or Florida, are going to give them a lot of heartburn because of state income taxes and property taxes that I mentioned won't be deductible the way they are now, or to the full extent that they are now. So you're going to have a lot of members of Congress are going to have to answer to the voters next year should this pass. The Senate is starting to market their bill, separate bill, up in committee this week, next week. So we will see after the Thanksgiving recess whether or not it can get through the Senate floor and what kind of conference they can have, because they say they want to get all this done by the end of the year. So now's the time to write to your member of Congress.
Yeah, pick up the phone and call early and call off. And
Amen.
But here's the thing. I mean, my hope is that it doesn't, because this is a horrible tax plan. I mean, this is a generational ripoff from the younger and the older citizens, and really a screw job, as you pointed out, to states like Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. And I look at Pennsylvania being a state that went for Donald Trump in 2016. This is one of those moments where Pennsylvania has some leverage here and saying, look, you pulled this, no Pennsylvania for you in 20.
Yes, and governor's races and congressional House and Senate races in 18 before that. So people were paying much more attention. We saw that in the turnout numbers in Virginia and New Jersey last week, extremely high turnout numbers for an off-year election. So it just says people are paying attention to what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, and the anger that was in 2016 is, I think, only growing, and 2018 shall be an interesting year. I wanted to get your thoughts on the tax plan, and throw out some ideas of what, if this passes as been presented, what is it going to mean for seniors? What is it going to mean for our parents and our grandparents' generation?
Well, sure. One very thing that older people, because they use the health care system, will have the medical expense deduction taken away from them. And we had one of our members testify or at a press conference on Capitol Hill last week how difficult it is if you're older and you need major surgery, that you need that medical expense deduction on your income tax, and that'll be gone, for example. One right there, as I mentioned earlier, property taxes will be limited. And state and local taxes appears to be done away with, and people on retirement incomes don't have the ability to go out and get another job, because most they are retired and they need what savings and income that they have for increased health care costs and for food and fuel and prescription drugs, for example. So seniors in particular are going to be hit very hard by both the House and the Senate bills that are right now being debated.
It's interesting, because here where I live in Pennsylvania, there's all this talk about getting seniors not to pay property tax because, there's the, no senior should lose their home because of taxes and all of that stuff. And I find it ironic that the Republicans have decided that not only are seniors going to pay property taxes, but we're not going to give you a tax break for paying those property taxes. I just see it as kind of ironic.
Yeah, absolutely, especially with what the statewide referendum was on property taxes just last Tuesday in Pennsylvania. Exactly. And the federal process in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate is moving in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy stuff. But again, the hope is that people will call their representatives, they'll get active, engaged, call their senators and call their representatives and say, no, we need some sanity in our tax code. And this, my friends, just not it. Rich, always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Always great to be with you. We at the
so
Alliance
much.
for Retired Americans appreciate what you're doing.
Good stuff. Thanks so much, Rich. Rich Fiesta, executive.
Question for our Trumpestuous president and his trumpeteers in Congress. Why are you even considering giving more tax breaks to corporate giants? First, the self-serving corporate class is wallowing in wealth, greedily hoarding it in offshore tax shelters and stock buyback schemes, refusing to invest it to benefit the vast majority of people they've been knocking down and holding down. Second, you shouldn't give away our public treasury when our nation has a budget deficit and faces huge needs for public investment, from our deteriorating infrastructure to our disappearing middle class. Third, our people's sense of equality and social unity has been severely fractured by 30 years of gross wealth inequality. So intentionally widening the wealth gap is criminally stupid and dangerous. Fourth, why would you think overpaid, overpampered CEOs deserve more pampering? They've become imperious potentates who feel entitled to gouge, cheat, defraud, lie, and otherwise run over us commoners. Consider Jeff Immelt, the recently retired imperious CEO of General Electric. Not only was he a frequent flyer on GE's corporate jets, but we now learn that he often took 2 jets at once. One carried him, while a second jet, called a chase plane, followed right behind him. Number 2 jet carried no passengers or equipment. It was just a spare in case His Royal Highness needed it for what? GE offers no reasonable answer, for there isn't one. Immelt says he never used the spare, but there it was, tagging along behind him, costing GE shareholders thousands of dollars for every hour it flew. This is Jim Hightower saying, this wasteful extravagance cost you and me too, for GE got a tax deduction for every flight Jeff's chase plane made. Why would Trump and company reward such outrageous corporate rip-offs with more tax breaks?
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
At this out. Going to take us in totally the wrong direction. At least somewhat qualified. You could make the argument, right? Actually knows where a hospital might be on a map. Actually knows what aspirin are. Look, you get what you can. I look at this, and it's again par for the course. Because understand, we've got a president who has pursued appointing probably the dumbest woman to ever hold the Department of Education head, in Betsy DeVos. And look, she may something, education not. In fact, she's so frustrated that she can't do anything that she's ready to quit. So that I'm hoping she doesn't. Betsy, stay on. Keep plugging away. Because hopefully you stay and nobody who's effective actually gets into that place. But you look at Rick Perry, a guy who said, we should do away with the Department of Energy. He's now in charge of the Department of Energy. You look at the guy from the EPA, Pruitt, who sued multiple times to restrict and destroy the EPA. I mean, you can go down the list of of the people that that they've put into place that were just horrible. But you could always make an argument that at least, you know what, they had a small shred of some bit of capacity to be able to do the job just a little bit. Even if it was just to destroy it, at least they were qualified to destroy it. At least they were qualified enough to pick up the hammer to destroy it. I look at this guy that evidently the Senate committee, Judiciary Committee, just approved to go to the full Senate. And it may have happened already today that this guy, this Brett Talley, who could be confirmed by the Senate for a federal bench position. I'm literally stumped at this. This is a guy who's never tried a case in a court of law. He's never tried a case. He's rated by the Bar Association as patently unqualified. And yet, Trump has put him up to sit on the federal district bench in Alabama. Now, again, I know it seems like all roads lead either to Russia or to Alabama. I kind of get it. But at least wouldn't you put someone who had some, maybe knew where a courtroom was? Maybe made a gavel and wood shop back in 8th grade? I don't know. Maybe, dresses up in his spare time in a robe? I don't know. But you would think, maybe just possibly you would think that mild qualifications. And now you find out that evidently you have to disclose any, potential conflicts. Do you own a bunch of shares in something? Do you, whatever. Is your wife, chief of staff to the White House counsel? Things like that. I guess he didn't bother. Because, did I mention his wife is chief of staff to the White House counsel? Who will be probably trying cases, I don't know, in front of the court at some point, especially as often as the Trump administration is being sued and will continue to be sued going forward. Don't you think maybe just a little that should have been disclosed? And I know filling out forms is really difficult. We have seen this over and over and over again with the Trump nominees. How many times has Kushner revised his forms? When I was a kid, you got one shot at it. If you didn't do it right, you failed. How is it he still has security clearance? Honestly, at this point, how is it that he and the other nitwits have security clearance? How's that possible? And if they were anyone other than the spawn of the Marmalade Mussolini, they wouldn't even be allowed near the office that considers you for security clearance, let alone in the door. So here's this guy, horribly unqualified. Just went through the Senate Judiciary Committee last Thursday on a party line vote because, look, Republicans got to have their people. And immediately I keep thinking of patronage. Are we back in the old days where you have to buy your positions? Because I look at this administration and you got to go, really? Callista Gingrich? Women ambassador to the Vatican? Really? The mistress of a thrice divorced cheater? Really? To the Vatican? You're going to send the sinners? Yes. And you go, I guess nothing is too low here. So I got a question. When do we kind of throw up our hands and say enough with this and move on? Understand, the American Bar Association has only unanimously rated 2 other judicial nominees not qualified since 1989. There have only been 2 other ones, and they didn't get appointed to the bench. This guy probably will be, because he's an ideologue. He's right in there with the Trumpsters. It was a blogger. said nice things about the Donald. And I guess, and this is where I think I screwed this up. And I think I screwed this up from the beginning. Had I come out right from the beginning and said nice things about his hair and how big his hands are and what a manly man he is and he smells like cookie dough, I don't know. Had I said nice things, maybe I could have been appointed to the federal bench because I guess I'm as qualified as this guy. It gives me hope. I didn't bother going to law school, but hey, I could be on the federal bench. Maybe he'll nominate me to the Supreme Court if I just start saying nice things. I don't think that's going to happen. But hey, one never knows. No one would have ever thought that someone as unqualified as this guy would have even gotten through a Senate, a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. I just, wow. Mind-blowing. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back with Talk Media News. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after born. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor. On this day in labor history, the year was 1974. That was the day Karen Silkwood was killed in a mysterious car crash. Though her death was ruled a one-car accident, some maintain she was forced off the road. Silkwood was a union activist and representative for Local 5-283 of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers. She worked at Kerr McGee's Cimarron plutonium plant in Crescent, Oklahoma, making plutonium pellets for nuclear reactor fuel rods. Meryl Streep popularized her life in the 1983 film Silkwood. Karen's union loyalty only grew after the company crushed a strike in 1972. She was elected to the Union Bargaining Committee just as the company moved to force a decertification election. She also served as a union health and safety rep. Silkwood found a number of apparent violations: routine contamination exposure, faulty respiratory equipment, falsified inspection reports, and improper storage of radioactive material. She met with OCAW leader Tony Mazzocchi to highlight safety issues in a campaign to beat back the decertification. It worked. Karen testified before the Atomic Energy Commission, worried about her own contamination. It was clear her home was contaminated too. She worked tirelessly to gather the documentation and the evidence detailing the company's life-threatening negligence. And on this day, Karen Silkwood was headed to Oklahoma City to meet Mazzocchi's assistant Steve Wodka and a New York Times reporter to present the evidence she collected. She never made it. Her car was found with rear-end damage near skid marks in a ditch along Route 74. While the company attempted to smear her as a drug-addicted lesbian who deliberately contaminated herself, they would eventually settle with her family for nearly $1.4 million. Karen Silkwood became a model and hero for women workers and all those who fight for safe workplaces.
This illegal term. Stop saying when the evidence becomes available. It's not a legal thing. This is about 30 people who have actually corroborated the stories of now 5 women. And
So more big news coming out of Alabama. Another woman comes forward. As I'm saying, look, once the gate opens, once the door opens, once that first person steps through, there's usually a line behind them. And look, here in Alabama, much different. Anyway, we're talk about the news in Washington, D.C. Also ignore a little bit. I've got Doug Christian, reporter for Talk Media News Service. Doug, thanks for taking time for us. So what do you think? Even Mitch McConnell is now coming out saying that he believes the accusers and that wannabe Senator Big Hat should step aside.
This in legal terms. Stop saying when the evidence becomes available. It's not a legal thing. This is about 30 people who have actually corroborated the stories of now five women. And they're all telling the same story. Yes, at the time that these women alleged that this happened, these 30 other people have said, yes, that's true. And the crazy thing is that the Washington Post reporter who broke this, the way he discovered this was he went and was listening to Roy Moore supporters. It was his supporters who knew about this. This was common.
Yep. No, I know somebody who works on the Jones campaign. And I asked, I said, did you know this? And he goes, yeah, everyone knew. Everybody in Alabama knew that Roy Moore was this kind of a guy. They just weren't going to use it because, well, it was all just rumor. Nobody was stepping forward.
Just so many rumors about so many things, and the fact that all newspapers don't want to be sued for libel unless they actually have evidence. And yet four women, now five, came forward with their name and said, yes, that actually happened. And they had nothing to gain. They had everything to lose from with their names being pulled through the muck there. So
that Breitbart has said they're sending reporters down there to investigate the women to go after them, and you go, just what I would expect from Bannon and Breitbart. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm right there with you. Look, I'm the father of a 15-year-old girl. If some 32-year-old guy was sniffing around my daughter, there'd be beatings to be had. And maybe that's what should have happened.
Should play on and say, wait a minute, Republicans have always held this idea, we're the party of family values, we're the party of good morals. You know what? Actually, we Democrats are the party that embraces morality. We would never support this. We would actually, if we caught this, would actually call the police. We wouldn't put up with this.
Argument that Senator Menendez should be ousted from the Senate because there are allegations, and again, there are allegations that all overseas he was doing kind of the same thing. Yep.
Was asked during deliberations. What is a senator? Yes, it actually happened.
I mourn for our republic. Is there an adult learning course for civics? My goodness. My gosh. Well, we should probably get right on. Let's move along. I understand that Donald Trump and I love this justification. He says he believes Vladimir Putin, but also believes our intelligence agencies. Or help me here because I'm struggling. Originally not the intelligence, but then yes, the intelligence. How's this playing? I'm confused.
The weird thing is that it isn't playing. And it isn't playing very well. The intelligence community is in the uproar about this. And of course, you heard James Clapper and John Brennan speak vociferously about how this is undermining the IC. And of course, the thing is that these nonpartisan people working within the spy agencies, they work for both parties. They try to stay out of politics and just keep their nose to the ground and report to whomever the president is. They are anything but political. And I mean, people like General Hayden was originally appointed by George W. Bush, has nothing to do with politics at all. And yet he's saying, well, they're political hacks.
Doug, I really struggle with siding with the CIA. Honestly, I kind of struggle with the whole, you know, we're full-throated endorsement of the spies. But when our president, you know, in public is calling them out, at some point you have to at least defend it, because I do understand the importance of having a spy network and doing some of the stuff that we do because other people are doing it. I get the game, but I'm struggling with.
Well, of course, the reason that it's been brought out in public is because the former chiefs of these spy agencies spoke against Donald Trump, and
I'll be honest, I'm just frustrated. Thanks so much, Doug Christian, Talk Media News. Look, you know, at the end of this, you know, part of the problem is that this president is just completely off the rocker. I mean, honestly, there was the report over the weekend, and we all saw it, that Trump was saying that he met with Vladimir Putin. They had, you know, had good meetings and, you know, all of this stuff. And he asked him a number of times, did you hack our election? Did you do it? And he said, and of course, Vladimir said no. And it was this kind of, you know, I asked him directly. And then, you know, the Kremlin basically threw him under the bus saying, well, not really. You didn't ask us anything. And then he meets with Duarte and, you know, was asked, did you ask about human rights? And said yes. And Duarte saying no. So again, you go back to, who do you believe? Do you believe a guy who really is, and I hate to talk badly about used car salesmen, but, you know, he seems to be lower on the chain than used car salespeople. He seems like a major con artist. And at some point, don't you go, we stop buying it? We stop buying into all of this? It's just frustrating. Now, over 400 millionaires and billionaires today, they went to Congress telling them to don't cut our taxes. Now, there's something interesting about, you know, people who won the game. These are the lottery winners. These are the people who, you know, either won the birth lottery or hit it big on the slots on Wall Street. They're the ones who won, and they're going, no, don't do this. This is bad. And yet we've got a Congress who seems hell-bent on doing the worst possible things. We've got an administration who's hell-bent on doing the worst possible things. And you go, at what point do we revolt? I mean, at some point, and look, this last election, this bloodbath that the Republicans just took, should have been a wake-up call to them. To say, look, all of the bad things that we're pushing, all of the, you know, the poison that we're pursuing, maybe we should stop. But no, that's not what they're doing. They're doubling down because they understand the bloodbath in 2018 is going to probably be even worse. And I look at Virginia. I think in Virginia, Democrats picked up like 15 seats in their House of Delegates, which is just unimaginable. And I'm looking here at Pennsylvania, where the Republicans have just a massive lead in both the House and the Senate, and going, who knows? Maybe it's possible, even as badly gerrymandered as this state is, that people that there are people of good conscience still left in the Republican Party who aren't just sycophants for this administration, who are going to go, maybe just a thought, maybe we need to get some of these crazy people out. Because understand, crazy has taken over the Republican Party. Honestly, I mean, it seemed like, for years, they were just kept marching to the extreme. And the party was, the candidates were always, I can be crazier than that guy. And the party kept going, okay, bring me the crazy guy. So what? There's someone crazier? Bring him on. The fact that Joe Walsh was a congressman is just amazing to me. Because he's a lunatic. It is of just amazing proportions to me that the party has gone so crazy. Because look, they used to be the party of fiscal conservatism, pay your bills, grab a quarter and make the eagle scream. I get that. Personally, I kind of like that. It's kind of how I am. Personal responsibility. You take care of yourself. You take care of your family. You take care of your community. You care about the country. You invest in the future. You leave something for the kids. They were supposed to be the party of family values. I got to be honest, I'm questioning the values. When there are people saying that, well, vote for Roy Moore because at least he's not a Democrat. That's a little troubling to me. When you have said, yes, I want the pedophile. Sign me up. Think about this for a second. Sometime in my lifetime, we went from hating the pedophiles, lock them up, kill them, that kind of mentality, and the Russians, where they were our mortal enemy, and everybody, learned as kids to hide under the desk because the bombs are coming, to where pedophiles and the Russians are now held in higher esteem by some Americans than their neighbors. Think of how nuts that is. Think for a second of how just, wow. And I guess just kind of remarkable on so many levels. I mean, stop and think about this. Russians, we're all, yes, higher approval rating. I never thought I would imagine that. A couple years ago, our family, we had done Florida for a couple years in a row for Christmas. And we were at the one resort we were staying at, and there were a bunch of Russian families there, because evidently South Florida is owned by a bunch of really rich Russian people. A lot of the condominiums and a lot of the places have been bought up because, hey, new money. Let's go vacation somewhere cheap. And there were little kids, right around the same age as my kids. And they were playing together. And I remember remarking to my wife going, I never really thought in my lifetime that our children, that we would be playing with Russians. And that it would, come to blows. Because I remember the movies of the 80s. It was always, we were at tension and we were, Drago and Rocky. And now we've got an administration that, seems to be in the employ of the Kremlin. And as much as I didn't like Ronald Reagan, as much as I wasn't a George H.W. Bush fan, as much as I really didn't like little W, I never really thought that they were on the side of pedophiles or the Russians. I would have never put them in that category. And yet, here we are, a Republican Party that is, seems to be bought and paid for. Seems to be doing rather well, thank you very much. And you got to wonder how much of that is the oligarch money on both sides of the flag divide. Because as I've said before, I don't really think that they care about national borders. They don't care about flags or national anthems or anything else. They care about money and power. Everything else is to be used to distract the peasant class, us. The fact that the kneeling at the football game thing is a thing is just mind-blowing to me. The fact that we've allowed ourselves to be sliced up and divided and pitted against one another over that is just stupid. Because while we're bickering over, he kneeled, or he didn't kneel, or he has a flag, or he's wearing it his underwear, they're robbing us blind. robbing us blind. And not just us, our children and our grandchildren in the future. Because remember, this is the party of fiscal responsibility. They were the party who, during 8 years, they cared about, they were squeezing, the eagle was dying. Squeezed so tight, austerity, sequester to the brink every 6 months. We weren't raising the debt ceiling. The world was going to be in global chaos because we weren't going to pay our bills because, well, they wanted to make the black guy in the White House look bad. Now that they're in charge, now that you've got the orange guy in the White House, now it's, hey, we got the credit card. We got Dad's credit card. Drug time. And there seems to be no bounds. What happened to fiscal responsibility? What happened to personal responsibility? What the hell happened to family values? What happened to the Republican Party? Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. Teamsters Local 630, based in Los Angeles, held a National Day of Action on Friday to bring attention to pay discrimination at Vistar's Ontario, California warehouse, where women, almost all Latina, are paid an average of 26% less than men doing similar work. Vistar supplies popcorn and candy for major movie theater chains across the country. 85 warehouse workers and drivers have just concluded their third unfair labor practice strike so far this year to protest labor law violations in their fight for fair pay. The union held demonstrations at several AMC and Regal theaters in California and across the nation to put a spotlight on the company's pay discrimination. Lou Vilvazo is Secretary-Treasurer of Local 630.
At the end of the day, they're performing the same functions and duties as their male counterparts. The difference is the gentlemen are making anywhere between $3, $6, as high as $9 difference for really the same job. These ladies are pulling the orders and building pallets just the way the guys are. They should get paid the same. That is equal pay for equal work.
Attorney Andrea Johnson of the National Women's Law Center joined union members Friday to confront the company's board of directors in Richmond, Virginia. She encouraged the company to engage the union in collectively bargaining for equal pay.
Women in unions experience much narrower wage gaps than women who aren't in unions. And the collective bargaining process and all the transparency that comes with that is really important to narrowing those pay disparities. So we really encourage them to come to the table and bargain for making sure that women are paid equally.
The pay disparity stems from workers being sorted into two different worker classifications segregated by gender.
That classification is something that is just basically generated to pay less. That's all there is. It is a shame. We're in 2017, and people around PFG are acting like this is the 1950s. That needs to stop.
A ruling last week ensures that New Mexico state workers must be paid when taking time off to vote in any election. Two plaintiffs sued the state over a paid administrative leave policy that excluded local elections. Workers Independent News executive producer Frank Emspak says this decision is particularly significant in a time of increasing efforts at voter suppression.
The United States is unique amongst Western democracies in not having voting on holidays. The judge's decision in New Mexico to allow workers to be paid during working hours to vote is a step in the long fight to allow working people to access the ballot box without impediment, without penalty. Access is crucial to increasing participation in our democracy and giving people the opportunity to express their point of view. This issue of when you vote has been contentious for about 150 years because this voting on Tuesday has always been seen as an impediment to working people voting. Everybody understood that. It requires, in many cases, a loss of wages, essentially a tax.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
So it appears Sean Hannity's got himself in a bit of a pickle. Probably not a great idea giving a pedophile a platform to justify and then defend. Probably not a great idea because some of your advertisers are going to go, I don't know that I really want to be associated with someone who's giving a pedophile a platform. Just kind of saying. And a couple of them have pulled their contracts, which again is their right to do. So what happened is the first one was this coffee machine making people, Keurig or whatever it is, and so he goes after them. Which, hey, advertisers, this is what happens when you walk away from Sean Hannity. He's going to make you pay. So all of his dim-witted puddle brain flag monkey followers, they go and smash the machines. Which I'm like, great. Nice job. You got some other appliances in your house you want to smash too? Get to it. It's good for the economy because you're going to buy another one next week anyway, dingwit. But it got me thinking, what is it about conservatives that, they either have to, smash something, burn it, or ban it, or destroy it? What is it about their mentality that they can't just go, I'm just going to stop going there or stop doing this? Or why does there have to be a display of some type of smashing? And look, I'm all in favor. I don't drink coffee, don't care one way or another. Smash your machine if you want. You paid for it. God bless you. It's your right as an American. And, maybe you'll buy another one next week. Who knows? So all these other brands, Hello Fresh, which I have no idea what they do. Hubble Contacts, they're out. The Society for Human Resource Management, they're just a list of a couple more who have said, you know what, we not so thrilled. We're going to kind of pull out. And I got to wonder what they're going to start smashing then. I don't know what HelloFresh is, but I can't imagine. I imagine it's probably vegetables or something. Are they going to start smashing that? It's just really crazy. But again, it comes back to this, what they've chosen. And this is the bizarre thing about the right-wing crazy people, is that, and the same thing with Roy Moore, they're justifying what these hypocrites have done. They've justified what Roy Moore and what Hannity have done, and you go, somebody has to hold them accountable for being wrong. Or am I missing something here? Because look, Bob Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, is being accused of also, and I don't know what it is about senators and being pedophiles, but he's being accused of going overseas and engaging in bizarre conduct with minors as well. He should go. He should have to resign. He should be thrown in jail. That isn't hard to do. That isn't hard to say. That isn't hard to believe. And look, I'm not a hang 'em high Law and Order type person. If he was diddling children, we have places for people like you. Not in the U.S. Senate. And this, I guess, is the divide between liberals, progressives, and conservatives. I'm able to look at the Democratic Party, of which I am a member, and say, you're wrong. Change. Let's put more people in who want to go in a different direction. Let's adapt to the times. Whereas you have on the conservative side, this I don't know if it's a fear of change. I don't know if it's, it's how we've always done it. I'm not sure what it is, but this just inability to admit that you're wrong. Look, I'm probably one of the biggest critics of Barack Obama of anybody. There were so many things that he could have done that didn't. There were so many opportunities that he let go by. It's just, it's really quite remarkable to me that what we see coming out of this party is this kind of insanity over a guy who was dead wrong. You can't admit it? Can't admit that Hannity was wrong? Can't admit that the Fox talking head, the propagandist, was wrong? Can't do that? I've been wrong a bunch of times. 6 to be exact. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. Being able to say, you know what, I was wrong, I think is part of being human, but it's also part of being a critical thinking, actually thoughtful person. And I don't see that from the folks on the right. I just don't. So we got lots to get to in this hour. We're going to talk about the Russia thing, Facebook, all of that, the breaking stuff with Little Junior, also some more groping. Got to get to groping, and back with our friend Propane Jane. A little instability in chief. Stick around. This is the Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. You remember, the Sanford and Son, Red Fox going, I'll be a dirty old man till I'm a dead old man. Turns out George H.W. Bush has taken that as his life mantra, because evidently the 6th woman has stepped forth that over the last several years, the former president has reached over and grabbed them by the posterior, by the behind there, and got a good handful. Evidently, the photo op was in 2013, where he decided it was a good idea to reach over and grab a 16-year-old. Now, his spokesman is saying, well, the president would never do anything intentionally. It was bad, and probably shouldn't have done it, and he would never do anything. It's just not in his heart to do anything that would cause anyone distress, except grab them by the behind. So yeah, yay. It's amazing times. Anyway, let's find out what's going on with our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, what do you think?
I think that there's like an epidemic going on or something. It just seems like.
Is it an epidemic, or this is just how things have always been, and we just didn't talk about it?
I think that that this is how things have always been, but what has happened, and we kind of talked about this last week, is that now all of a sudden there is a preponderance of sociopaths in public office, and running for public office. And right now, the man that sits atop everything is also someone who is a sociopath and has a history of alleged sexual assault, and also self-proclaimed sexual assault. So this is where we are, and I think because these people are in positions of power, or are seeking positions of power, there's so much more scrutiny, and then these things are coming to light, and unfortunately, the Republican Party is looking to be very hypocritical in all of this as usual.
As usual, but but here's the thing. I mean, I dated a girl back in college who waited tables, and she said there wasn't a day that went by that some old guy didn't reach out and grab her by the behind or pinch her behind. I have a girl I knew who was a nurse, said the exact same thing. What is it about old men who think they have the ability to reach over and grab my behind? This is not new. It's just that this is now front and center. And I guess part of the question then becomes is this, what is the definition of assault, and putting this kind of thing in the same category with someone like Roy Moore, I think diminishes a little bit of what Roy Moore has done. Or am I off base?
Yeah, and I also think just even everything that has come out with Fox News and Bill O'Reilly and everything that's coming out in Hollywood, and this just idea of like madmen, right? That are in certain positions of power, and because they have been given that power and privilege. And again, I don't know if it's sort of, the chicken or the egg, if sort of, these people find their way into office and then just continue to be the same, people that they were before they got there. But ultimately that power, allows them, to have more access to people and to be trusted around people. It's like, Roy Moore. I mean, he's a judge. I mean, he was hanging out around the courthouse. He was a prosecutor. So
he was hanging around the little Santa display, hitting on the gift wrapping girls.
Exactly. And you think about Donald Trump and with these pageants, and because he was the major financer of this pageant industry. Then he gets to walk around the dressing room, and he's afforded this opportunity to really just be a sleazeball. And so, unfortunately, like you said, this is a cultural phenomenon that has been going on since forever. And it does have a lot to do with how much power we actually give these men, even though they're very oppressive.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, though, is I know someone who's working on the campaign, and I just read an article in the New Yorker who said, look, this was an open secret. Everybody knew this, and it reminded me. I talked about this at the beginning of the show of a guy who was the athletic director at my high school, who everybody knew. In fact, my mother went to school there years before, and she knew. And when it finally came out, he'd have been abusing kids for 50 years in multiple states. And again, everybody knew, but nobody did anything about it. And this is the same thing. This reporter said, we went down there and it was the open secret. Everybody knew. And yet here we are. This guy was a lightning rod for years, and it never came forward.
Yeah. I mean, the learned helplessness and how communities actually can aid and abet people. And I think that is why it's hard for people to understand when we use a term like sociopath. And it's hard for people to understand that the people who are perpetrating these crimes oftentimes are very well-respected members of their communities and can be very charming people and can be well-regarded. And oftentimes are, like knee-deep in church ministry even sometimes.
Don't trust those church people.
Yeah, and actually use that as a cloak to kind of maintain this secrecy. And so I think that's the really scary part about it. But unfortunately, what's even scarier is that there are people who know, like you say, and it's an open secret. And while there are people who know and are disgusted, there are also people who know, and like we've seen, in the aftermath of these allegations coming out about Roy Moore, that even like the evangelicals in Alabama are more supportive of him in light of these allegations.
Because Joseph was an old, dirty old man, and the Virgin Mary was a teenager. Yeah, I've heard the story. I repulsed at it as a child learning about it in school. It didn't seem right then, and it still doesn't.
Right, but like people are finding, these justifications that are pathological in and of themselves, and are very revealing about the people who are using them. But I think it just goes to show how these institutions that in a lot of ways people want to be able to trust. At the same time, they're not able to because they're like looking the other way and actually in a lot of ways enabling very pathological behavior.
Yeah, it's nuts. Did you ever think, I mean, I was talking about this earlier, did you ever think that in our lifetime we would look at the Russians and pedophiles in a better light than our neighbors who happen to be Democrats?
I mean, I'm amazed that honestly it's still shocking to people. I'm amazed that we still haven't accepted collectively that there is no low that is too low. And like we continue to say, I think a couple of weeks ago you asked me, like, when do they have this epiphany moment, this like come to Jesus moment that, hey, this guy, this party, this individual who, we are saying is like the savior figure and is so great isn't really all that he's cracked up to be. And we talked about how it's nearly impossible for these people to do that. And it really does border on, delusion. It really is like a cult, unfortunately, where they will follow these individuals to the ends of the earth, even though what they're doing is like the antithesis of what they claim to be, having as values.
Yeah, they were the party of family values, and I got to question the values. I really do, because I've had this conversation with conservatives who throw it out to me. Well, do you want those 300-pound guys dressed up like women going to the bathroom in the same bathroom your daughters are going in? And I go, I'm not as worried about them, hurting my kids or touching my kids as the guy down the street who's like you, claiming to be, religious and all of that. I got to be honest. I trust you less than I trust them.
Well, and that's what's so interesting about Roy Moore saying, well, he doesn't recall dating a woman that their mother didn't approve of it.
That's great. Like somehow that justifies it.
I'm like, there's so many things that are just so interesting about that, right? Like, where is the father? Where clearly the person is a minor if they need permission from a parent to date him.
Yeah. Do you really think he was at the mall asking the people he's groping, asking the parents for permission to grope them? Come on, that's ridiculous. And shame on Hannity for allowing him to say that. And you know what? Good for Hannity what he's getting. I hope someone smashes. Never. I'm not going there. Not going there. They can take their coffee machine and smash them all they want.
Well, but I think that even though it's really painful to sort of listen to like the mental gymnastics people are going through to try to make excuses and like justify these really heinous things, I think again it is very revealing about the people who are doing it, and I think in particular for this religious right and evangelical kind of piece of the Republican base, this is really a very direct confrontation of the hypocrisy that has really been going on with them ever since they latched themselves onto Donald Trump. Because, everything he's done has been, just not compassionate conservatism.
Yeah. I'm not buying the compassionate conservatism thing. It's like jumbo shrimp or military intelligence or any of the oxymorons if you want to throw together. I'm not buying compassion and conservatism. They're incompatible.
Yeah, they're incompatible, but I think now what we're seeing is that it has gone so far past that point that now we've crossed into, wow, this is actually a party that is actually on the side of depravity, right? I mean, it isn't just that they aren't compassionate, it's that they're actually sociopaths. Yep. And that they actually are doing things that are very aberrant in our society. And I think that is why you see this blue wave happening in Virginia. I mean, it is why you see more and more women running for public office, in response to what we're seeing, because there is an assault on our human rights and just our moral conscience, and I think that the result, actually, in the midst of all of this, is actually a good thing, is that people are actually rising up to fight back.
Yeah, but while they're doing that on one side, I think the other side is they're rising up too, just in a more violent way. And I don't know if you saw the latest FBI statistics, but hate crimes have risen again for the second year in a row.
Right.
And a lot of, half of them are racially motivated crimes, and you go, we're really suffering a pulling apart, and I don't know what we look like on the other side of this.
Yeah. I mean, on Inauguration Day, you asked me if this, if we could expect a worsening, and just sort of extremism and the worst excesses of this right-wing movement. And I said, yeah, I think we've already seen it, and this pattern started actually when President Obama was elected. That hate crimes were on the rise, and hate groups were on the rise, and so that again is a response to demographic change, and I think that those people did feel very emboldened, and they have been emboldened for this past year, because they have someone there who's saying the types of things that they believe, and then is also, sort of winking and nodding, and refusing to call them terrorists, and refusing to actually vilify them in the same way that he vilifies everyone else. So I just think that, unfortunately, the climate that we're in is going to be this back and forth between both sides. On the one side, people making really, really groundbreaking progress, and on the other side, people just regressing and devolving.
And attacking. And a perfect example of that is, look, I don't think there are very many people who look at the women who have come forth about Roy Moore and try and discredit them. But I look at Breitbart, who claims they're sending a couple of reporters down specifically to do that, to go after and tear these women's lives apart.
And for what purpose, right? I mean, ultimately, it's for tax cuts.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, ultimately, their goal is to keep this Senate seat red. This is Jeff Sessions' seat. And so no matter what, I mean, they can't just throw up their hands and go, oh, gosh, guys, unfortunately, we made a mistake by running a Bannon-backed candidate who, 9 out of 10 times is going to be a sleazeball.
Oh, and is he ever? I mean, look, and that's the thing. Didn't vet. And again, this is it seems that the Bannon MO, because they didn't do it with Trump or any of his people, they don't vet anybody. They'll let any crazy lunatic be the head of something. I mean, it's amazing to me that Roy Moore is in the position he is in after all of the high profile stuff that he's been in, that none of this ever came forward before, and that everybody knew about it.
Right, and it's like you said, it's an open secret, right? But then if this is who you're literally going to run as a Republican Party, and everybody's going to endorse this person, and you guys didn't do your due diligence in opposition research to just find out basic information that he's known around the entire state, as a child molester.
Yeah, and was banned from a mall. I mean, how bad does it have to be that you get banned from the mall?
Right. So ultimately, you know, and what I think is so unfortunate about this is that, you know, his opponent, Doug Jones, is an amazing candidate. He's got an amazing history. I mean, you know, by all accounts, he's somebody who has been integral in, like, you know, prosecuting hate crimes. Particularly at this moment in history. I mean, I think that's a very interesting parallel.
Yeah, I mean, this election, the people of Alabama have an opportunity to really get on the right side of history.
Exactly. And up until this point, unfortunately, they were firmly in the Roy Moore category. This is despite, I mean, everything else about him being, you know, extremely extreme and aberrant. Even before, and again, people locally already knowing him as someone who's a child molester, and he was still getting the vast majority of the support and on track to actually win that race.
Yep.
And so unfortunately, you know, I think that you know, the powers that be in the establishment Republican Party just kind of said, hey, this is a safe red seat. It doesn't really matter who's there. You know,
we'll put a lunatic in there. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter because ultimately people are so polarized, and the Southern strategy has been so effective for the last 50 years that we know the white voters in Alabama are going to go out and they're going to throw most of their votes to the Republican Party.
Yeah, let's get the racist child molester into office.
Exactly.
They still, hey, look, the people of Alabama still have a chance to prove me wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think they're going to.
Well, we'll see. I mean, we'll have to see, right?
Yep.
I mean,
we will see. I still think
this is going to be an extremely interesting test. Right, because I mean, now what you have is even the Republicans ahead of time saying, "Hey, if he actually gets elected, right?" Because they don't even really trust the voters of Alabama to not vote for this guy. So they're saying if he actually gets elected, there's a procedure that we could follow to, you know, basically, you know, he could be basically, I guess, kicked out.
They can block him from taking the Senate seat, and then the governor would appoint somebody for another special election. Maybe Luther Strange again. Who knows? Or maybe Jeffy. Maybe the little weasel gets to go back to the Senate.
Yeah, but like before he even gets there, they're figuring out a way to kick him out of there.
And I love it. I think it's great. But Jane, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. I look forward to next week because, look, the insanity never seems to end.
It never does.
Have
a great week.
You as well, our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break. Right back with Justin Hendricks. We're going to talk about the Facebook stuff. What's going on with Russia. And this on this tragic Italian. Many could not speak English. An electrical outage earlier that week forced the miners to light kerosene lanterns and torches. A coal car filled with hay caught on fire from one of the wall lanterns. The blaze spread to timbers supporting the mine. One of the survivors remembered, "We stopped working as usual shortly before 3:30 and set out for the shaft. After we had proceeded about a half a mile toward the shaft, we detected a faint odor of smoke, which became more marked as we advanced, until it was almost unendurable. Then we knew the mine was on fire and that there was danger ahead. Many of the miners did make their way to the surface, and some then returned to the mine to aid others. Heroic volunteers attempted to rescue the trapped miners. 12 rescuers died. The mine shafts were closed off to smother the fire, but this caused many miners to suffocate from the mixture of carbon dioxide and nitrogen which built up. One small group of miners were able to survive 8 days until their rescue by building a wall to seal out the fire and poisonous gases. They drank water leaking from a coal seam. As a result of this disaster, the Illinois legislature established stronger mine safety regulations. They passed a law that later developed into the Illinois Workmen's Compensation Act.
Cherry, cherry, so soft on your heart. Not everyone knows the story inside. At the turn of the century, 1909.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistory.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Somebody's watching you, you like it. Somebody's watching you, you care.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, RT, the television network RT, and the website, evidently they have filed their paperwork registering with the Justice Department as a foreign agent. And I said that from a while ago. They should have done that years ago. But again, you look at all of this stuff going on around Russia, all of the news that's popped out today. You got Junior and his correspondence with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So much going on, so much to talk about, which is why we've asked Justin Hendricks to come talk with us. He's an organizer with the March for Truth. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, how are you doing?
Do I have you there, Justin?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Really
great.
Really there. So I look at this, the fact that you've now got this breaking story of Junior, who evidently had during the campaign, some correspondence, or as I would call some collusion.
It certainly looks like collusion. In fact, I think James Clapper went on CNN tonight. Was talking to Anderson Cooper, and he said it sure looks like a conspiracy.
Yeah, and this is one of those moments where why does he still have security clearance?
Well, I assume we're talking about his father. Why does his father still have any kind of clearance? I think it's really something when you look at the timing of some of the discussion between Don Jr. and some of the statements that his father was making on the campaign trail. When you look at the sort of messaging that was coming out of the campaign, certainly in the final weeks. Donald Trump mentioned WikiLeaks more than 130 times in the final weeks of the campaign, and now we know why.
I look at this, and again, the questions keep coming back to, the president met with Vladimir Putin, and he was evidently asked the question, Vlad, did you do anything? And evidently, like Judas, 3 times said no.
That was an extraordinary thing this weekend. I think it was I don't know. You can be continuously shocked by what comes out of the president's mouth, but things like what he said this weekend, the tweets he went on to tweet this weekend, just absolutely extraordinary that he would again favor an adversarial president of a leader of a foreign country over our own intelligence agencies. It's traitorous.
Yeah, and yet there he was, he asked the question, he said, and the interesting part of this, and I don't know how you get from a position of, I don't trust our intelligence agencies, but I do trust the intelligence agencies. I don't know how you can play both sides of that.
It sounded to me like his aides took him aside, after he said what he said on Air Force One, and they said, look, you got to clean this up, and here's what you need to say. But it was a really poorly delivered line the next day. I don't know if you watched the actual clip, but it didn't come out very smoothly. I don't think he had a whole lot of faith in the words that he was saying. He was trying to put that back in the box, but it didn't work out very well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that he's let out of the box. But here's the thing. I mean, we keep coming back to, and I just had this conversation the other day, about Facebook and about social media, and there are still people who believe, the Russians did nothing wrong, Justin. They only did what was legally permissible. Even if they did it, it's still okay.
I think that obviously we're in a situation where the internet is made it possible for a variety of different voices to reach us in new ways. And platforms like Facebook have changed the way we receive information and news. And a lot of that transition, a lot of that evolution has happened extremely quickly. And we're only now starting to figure out, what some of the externalities of the growth of these enormous technology companies, what that means for our democracy. And so, Russia had an opportunity to take advantage of an attack surface that we happen to all carry around in our pockets with us. And they were able to target propaganda and to experiment with really pushing a lot of information, news, events, false accounts at Americans in the run-up to the 2016 election. And, it had an impact.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and we keep coming back to the numbers. And originally the numbers were, I forget, 170,000, 100,000, and they just keep going up and up and up every time they update or release more information. I guess the question is do we have a right to know, since Facebook is a private company, do we have a right to know, how we were exposed and what we were exposed to? There's an absolute right to that?
Here's the thing. What you say is exactly right. It was only about a year ago, I think it was on November the 10th, that Mark Zuckerberg, made his famous comments that it was absurd to think that fake news on Facebook had anything to do with the election. And it was several months before we learned, that maybe as many as 10 million people were exposed to Russian propaganda on Facebook. Later, that number went up and up and up again. The latest number that we learned, over 150 million Americans exposed to Russian propaganda on Facebook. And I don't know if the company would necessarily have made that number public had it not been for the work of independent researchers and journalists who were able, in some cases, to extract that information out of some back doors and figure that out. But one of the things that I've been looking at, along with others, is going forward, we can expect these types of attacks again, these kind of coordinated misinformation attacks from adversaries like Russia. What should we expect from these companies when something like this happens? What type of obligation do they have for us as citizens? And one of this, you mentioned the phrase "right to know." That's one idea. One idea is perhaps we should expect these companies to inform us, to provide the data, and to really give us an account of what happened so that we can understand it. We can legislate around it, perhaps. We can introduce, perhaps fixes, things that might help us to cope with this new information environment.
Yeah, but here's the thing. There's some who are saying, look, this isn't just us. I mean, Russia's been doing this all around the world. Why in Germany, for instance, didn't it work as well as it did here in the U.S.?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that we know is in the run-up to the French election, there was quite a lot of propaganda. We know that Facebook it purged as many as 30 million accounts in the run-up to the French election, a similar number in the German election. We've just been reading over the last few days about Russian involvement in the Catalan independence referendum. Some news has just come out about the Russian effort around Brexit, in particular on Twitter. So yeah, these tactics have been really, used by Russian intelligence around the world to try to influence elections. And you mentioned you said that perhaps we haven't seen them as effective in some of these other places. I think to some extent in France and in Germany, they looked at what happened at Brexit. They looked at what happened in October, November, and earlier in the American election, and they took some lessons from it.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, and maybe they were a little bit more critical. Do you think? Because I've made this argument as well. I mean, I saw a lot of the early propaganda stuff, and I just looked at it and go, "Wow, that's a bridge too far." And I would hope that other people were thinking critically, and or am I giving too much faith to humanity?
I'm not even, I don't hold to account some of the people who fell for some of the propaganda that they responded to. You know, there was a story in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago about one of the people who participated in one of the events planned by Russian operatives on Facebook. There were, dozens of these events that took place around the country where real live people showed up to participate, and some of them were protest events. And in some cases, we know Russian operatives encouraged opposing sides to come into the streets and, oppose one another. But there was one particular activist in Baltimore who attended an event, around kind of police injustice that, she deeply believed in that. She had a family member who was affected by police violence, and she, believed in the cause. And, one of the things that she said to the Guardian newspaper was, I think Facebook should inform people who are caught up in these hoaxes. It matters.
Yeah, I agree, but at some point you got to. It comes, I don't know. It comes back to some bit of critical thinking on a certain level. But then again, you look at some of this stuff right here in my backyard in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You had one of the first Russian trolls, this Melvin Reddick, who didn't exist, I guess. So someone right here in my backyard.
Well, I think one of the things that I definitely want to make sure I sort of mention to all your listeners, we're running a petition right now to try to encourage Facebook to come clean, to be transparent. It's a change.org petition. There are almost 90,000 people that have signed it, asking people to or asking Facebook to reveal to Americans exactly how they are exposed. I think to the literacy question, it could be a huge literacy lesson for America if Facebook were to actually inform every user, all those 150 million users. Maybe you log on tomorrow morning, Rick, and right at the top of your timeline, there's a little message, and it says, hey, Rick, you've been exposed to Russian propaganda. Click here to find out how. Maybe you open that feature, you open that application, and if you click the page, if a friend of yours shared one of those events onto your timeline, perhaps that information's there. And I think that would be a lesson for Americans. It would be an opportunity to really explain to people the gravity of the situation.
I agree with you, but at some point, do they not figure out how to get around that? I mean, I'm not a computer whiz by any stretch of the imagination, but I look at this and they seem to always figure out ways around where they are, what they're doing. Again, I keep coming back to this. You can't believe what's on the internet. At some point, you've got to be verifying the sources that and this is what I teach my kids. Look, you're going to be exposed to tons of crap. They're going to be just inundated with stuff, but you've got to evaluate the sources and where this stuff comes from. You can't believe everything that's on the internet, and I guess that's where my premise starts from. And I get your point, and I understand that people do truly believe in certain causes, but at a certain point, you've got to evaluate. Or am I off base, do you think?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We all have to do our best to be cognizant of the sources of information that we're consuming. I can trust the Rick Smith Show, but there might be some funny pages on Facebook or accounts on Instagram that I ought not put too much faith in. But the reality is, that people on the whole, when you add them up in the aggregate, are prone to this type of misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. And so there are some steps that we need to take systematically, both with regard to how these technology platforms operate, as well as, how we think about their relationship to our democracy. And I do think that right now there's a lot of pressure on the platforms. There are a lot of, you were talking about Alabama earlier, Terry Sewell is one of the congressional leaders who has called on Facebook to notify users. You got Senator Jack Reed, you got Mark Warner, Senator Blumenthal, just Adam Schiff, of course. A variety of them They want to see more transparency from these companies. And I think the reason is that we're going to have more transparency to deal with exactly what you say. These attacks are going to get more and more sophisticated. They're going to begin to use, more advanced technologies like artificial intelligence. And it's going to get harder and harder to tell, a bot from a real person. And we're going to have to contend with that. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is with transparency.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the hope is that it's something we can possibly do. Because I guess it's technologically possible to do what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the technology is part of it. But, one of the reasons I believe that transparency is so important for the technology platforms at the moment is because, Congress can't legislate, can't make rules in a void of information. If we don't know what's going on, really, if we don't have the data, then Congress can't make effective rules. The other thing I'd say is that, independent researchers, academics, others who would like to study this problem, they also can't do their job if they don't have information. So transparency is really an answer on a number of different levels. And that's why, the March for Truth, we've started this petition. That's why we're trying to call on Facebook to come clean.
No, it's good stuff, and I hope people will sign up for it. We'll tweet it out and get it up on our website as well. Last line of questioning. In order for us to do what you're talking about and for Congress to move in that direction, don't we first have to acknowledge what happened in 2016? And don't we, as the voters, don't we have to say, yeah, we were duped? Isn't there some kind of admission at some point to where we? Because look, most of the people I know, they don't buy this at all. No one influenced my vote. I was voting for who I was going to vote for. Don't we as a society have to come to that we were influenced?
I believe that. I believe that we simply don't have all of the details, and that this election came down to a few tens of thousands of votes, and you look at the fact that we're now seeing a coordination between the Trump administration. Look, the Washington Post published a piece today. They added up the number of connections between individuals in the Trump administration and Russia, and the number was 30 individuals who are now known to have had contacts with Russian officials and others in the run-up to the election. We're now finding these things out about, of course, the WikiLeaks connection with Don Jr. A lot has been written about his Trump Tower meeting, where, the offer was there to exchange dirt on Hillary Clinton. Those the DNC hack, the WikiLeaks emails, all of that mattered. It certainly had a huge impact on the media cycle. It had a huge impact on voters' opinions of Hillary Clinton. And absolutely, we need to understand precisely what happened. That's why I've been advocating for so long around the Russia investigations. I think it's crucial that we get to the bottom of it. It's the only way we'll restore faith in the legitimacy of our government.
So you actually believe 100% that the Russians did what Donald said they didn't do and influenced this election?
At this point, it's not a matter of belief. There's plenty of evidence, both evidence that has been surfaced by independent journalists, evidence that has been presented by the large technology companies that testified on Capitol Hill just last week, as well as evidence that we've seen presented in court filings in the Mueller investigation, in addition to, the kind of summary judgment of American intelligence. I just don't feel like it's a question anymore.
It's an imperative, and hopefully it's something we get our representatives to move on. How do we do outside of the change.org petition that we're going to get out? What else should people do?
Well, the other thing I would definitely encourage people to do, if you're not aware of it, in case the Mueller investigation is in any way interfered with by this administration, a variety of progressive groups have prepared a set of demonstrations around the country that will only take place if, in fact, Robert Mueller is fired. And you can find out more about that at trumpisnotabovethelaww.org. You can sign up for events in your neighborhood. I believe there are as many as 350 events that have been planned around the country. March for Truth has been helping to organize those, along with Public Citizen, Indivisible, Move On, variety of other organizations. And, there is plenty of news that gets circulated to the participants in those events as well. So that's a great place to go and find more.
Good stuff. Justin, I appreciate you taking time for us. Please come back and keep us up to date on what's going on.
Rick Smith, keep doing what you are doing.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Justin Hendricks. Again, we'll get a link to the change.org petition. Hopefully folks will take on to that and as we learn more. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We gotta take the bastards down.
Meryl Streep popularized her life in the 1983 film Silk. Karen's union loyalty grew after the company crushed a strike in 1972. She was elected to the Union Bargaining Committee just as the company moved to force a decertification election. She also served as a union health and safety rep. Silkwood found a number of apparent violations: routine contamination exposure, faulty respiratory equipment, falsified inspection reports, and improper storage of radioactive material. She met with OCAW leader Tony Mazzocchi to highlight safety issues in a campaign to beat back the decertification. It worked. Karen testified before the Atomic Energy Commission, worried about her own contamination. It was clear her home was contaminated too. She worked tirelessly to gather the documentation and the evidence detailing the company's life-threatening negligence. And on this day, Karen Silkwood was headed to Oklahoma City to meet Mazzocchi's assistant Steve Wadka and a New York Times reporter to present the evidence she collected. She never made it. Her car was found with rear-end damage near skid marks in a ditch along Route 74. While the company attempted to smear her as a drug-addicted lesbian who deliberately contaminated herself, they would eventually settle with her family for nearly $1.4 million. Karen Silkwood became a model and hero for women workers and all those who fight for safe workplaces.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Fascist, you may be surprised. People all over this world are getting organized to bound to lose. Fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Website, thericksmithshow.com. Joe Biden was on with Stephen Colbert. He said, I think it will, God willing, it will go down as the single exception in American history, talking about the legacy that Trump will leave behind. And look, at the end of the day, this is going to be one of those moments where I say, Joe, I'm sorry. I understand the passing of your son. I can't imagine how horrible that was, but you should have run for president. That simple. We wouldn't be in this mess. I don't think we would. I don't think we'd be in this if it weren't for Joe stepping aside. Because look, the party would have coalesced around Biden, the vice president. It is what happens, and it's what should happen. Seemed sane, rational, and all of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, on the Russia stuff and all of that. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, because I agree with Justin. I think we're at a point right now to where it's not a matter of if it happened. It's not even really a matter of to what extent. We know, I think we know so far what's out there that it was huge. And I think there's much more coming. Which is why I think Trump doesn't really have a clue of what he is stepping into with what he pulled in Russia, or what he pulled with Putin. I mean, it's just amazing stuff. And now the the revelations that Junior was colluding with Assange. Sorry, Julian, no ambassadorship for you. Crazy, crazy time. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If any of today's program, you can download the podcast there at the website or get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go. I'm looking forward to big week this week. We'll see you back here tomorrow night. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@therick.com. Until next time.